Welcome to the CodeBreaker Mindset, where leaders share the unwritten rules for success. I'm your host, Chitra Nawbatt. Joining us today is Ashley Etienne, founder and CEO of Etienne and Saint. Ashley, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You've been described as the queen of the war room. Most recently, you served as deputy assistant to President Biden and communications director for Vice President Harris. In the past, you've had senior leadership roles in communication for President Obama, Speaker Nancy Pelosi. After the White House, you founded your own strategic communications firm. You're also a CBS News political contributor and a senior advisor to PR firm Weber Shandwick. Take us through your journey. We're about to get into master class in communications.
Yes.
But take us your journey to the White House.
So I won't spend so much time on it, but the story is that when I was a young girl, around the age of 6 or 7, my dad took us from the suburbs to the city. And I asked him, why are these people living differently and their conditions different than my own and what we have in our neighborhood? And my dad said, well, there's a lot of decisions that are made for them. And it was the for them that actually stuck with me as a young kid. And he said, if you want to make change, you need to go to Washington. Well, my dad wasn't a political contributor, we weren't a political family, so he had no idea on how to give me the roadmap to go to Washington. Fast forward, I decided one day after I'd graduated college, I want to go to Washington. Didn't do any internships because I had to work my way through college. And I wrote out 5 members of Congress, wrote out why they should hire me, which is probably the beginning of my communications career. And I jumped on a plane. Against the wishes of my family. They wanted me to stay in Texas and be a teacher, noble profession, but just wasn't for me. And knocked on their door and I told them why they should hire me. Got 3 offers, decided to take the one from the member that was going to run as a Democrat for U.S. Senate seat in Texas, which you know how that goes. We've tried that again and again and it doesn't work out. And I knew he was going to lose. So that was going to create an opportunity, which is, again, probably the beginning of my strategic career, for me to quickly move up in the ranks in his office. So I chose his office. So I went from the front desk girl to, like, probably within a year, the head of communications for his office. And then after that, I just put my head down and worked and worked and worked. And what I did was really put myself in the center of the action. I run to the fire. That's just my reputation. It's just who I am. If it's hot, I want to be in the center of it. Typically, that's where the A team is. That's where the best people are. And so that's where I developed my reputation of being a crises manager, because I just really ran to the fire, and that adrenaline and that purpose, the purpose of the work, the mission-driven work that's right there in the center of the action is what really got me hooked on politics in Washington.
So take us into the center of this action. And as part of that, I want to get into the rules of the game.
Sure.
So you're in the White House, various different roles. Bring this to life for us. How did you learn and figure out the written and the unwritten rules to the communications game in the highest elected office in the United States?
I mean, it was a lot of just really studying. I'm a student of politics. I'm a student of people. I think what gives me an edge is that I've had a real experience. I immerse myself in a real life experience. My house in DC, when I first moved to DC, was in the hood. It was very intentional that I really stayed around people so that I understood people. I understood people's motivations, not just our constituents, but also those people in those back rooms of the Capitol and the corridors of the West Wing, understanding people's motivation, understanding what drives them, who they are, what satisfies them, what doesn't. All of that made me an incredible communicator. And of course, I've had the benefit of working for the most exceptional, transformative political figures in modern time. So I just got a front row seat, a masterclass in how to be an effective communicator in these high pressure, high intense, all stakes, everything on the line environments from some of the best in the business.
Give us an example. What is that written rule and what is that unwritten rule that you learned when you're in that type of a role?
Yeah, for me, I think the written rule is, and I know we'll get into this a little later, it's, as I said to you, I'm not into spin. I don't spin reporters. I don't spin people. I'm honest. And I think when you're honest, you can sleep well at night, but being an honest broker to me is one of the written rules that I learned early on, and I think you can't ever go wrong with. The unwritten rule is understanding people's motivations. It's really very Machiavellian in a lot of respects. It's, it is transferable to any field you're actually in if you want to be successful. Communications is just a vehicle, but the basics and the foundation of how you operate and win in the game are are similar to any and transferable to any industry. So for me, I think the unwritten rule is understanding motivation and people's motivations. And when you combine the two, being an honest broker, understanding people's motivation, I think that enables you to create a messaging framework, a communication strategy that actually penetrates and wins the day.
How has that communications framework evolved? Because you talk about honest broker, understanding people's intention. Historically, many of us are conditioned that when you receive information from a particular authority figure, whether it's mom and dad, whether it's a teacher, whether it's president, prime minister, a member of the clergy, and back in Pioneer Village, or maybe when I was a young child, information received from a certain authority figure, you take it at face value. It is the quote unquote law, it is data, it is factual. Fast forward to where we are today.
Factless society, factless environment. But I'm sorry, I was
no,
let you.
But please go ahead.
Yeah.
Which is exactly to where we are today.
Yeah.
Characterize where we are. How have we evolved from that? Where are we?
Yeah.
And what is the framework now?
Sure. Oh my gosh. I mean, that's such a big question. So where we are is a factless environment. So much of the inputs that we're receiving are corrupted, if that makes any sense, to a degree corrupted. So when we think about inputs, you're thinking about, to your point, statements from elected officials, from authority figures, to the media, to mis and disinformation on social media platforms, to AI. Much of that has been corrupted by nefarious figures and individuals, people that have bad motivations and intentions, intentions to manipulate, intentions to falsely manipulate. And so that is the environment that we're currently in, and it really has, had this incredibly corrosive effect on society. And what I mean by that is you have so many people now questioning even what their eyes have seen. I mean, look at January 6th as an example of that. And if we were to take a poll today, I'm almost willing to bet that at least 40% of the country would say that it wasn't a violent mob that stormed the Capitol to burn it down, right? So that's the environment that we're in, and it makes it very hard as a communicator to penetrate people with fact database information. My former boss, Nancy Pelosi, used to always say this, maybe this was 8 or 10 years ago. On the Hill, the problem is, between the two parties, is we can't stipulate to a set of facts any longer. If we can't stipulate to a set of facts, if we both can't agree that the sky is blue, how are we going to solve big problems like our climate crises? How are we going to lead the world if we cannot agree and stipulate to a set of facts? Now, you broaden that out and you look at society. If we can't agree that those founding documents have relevance in today's society and should be our guiding principles for the nation, I mean, I think democracy was probably one of the biggest losers in November. The principles of democracy. How do we move forward and lead the world if we can't agree any longer? If we can't agree that who once was our adversary, our national adversary, now deserves the keys to the castle, how do we make sense of all of that? And I think that is where we are right now. And I think you're finding that a lot of people are checking out. It's like what Kendrick Lamar said, they're turning the TV off. They're no longer They're no longer, apathy is sort of setting in. People are sort of checking out to some degree. And we haven't even gotten into your feeds and what people are getting in their feeds, right? I mean, the mis and disinformation, domestic and international, intentionally trying to drive actions, undermine the very fabric that binds this nation and our understanding of what's important and what is fact and what isn't. So we're in a really incredibly tenuous time, in my opinion. I'm not so sure how we get out of this. And you and I were talking about AI before and like the corrosive effect of AI. I mean, that's a whole nother ball of wax that we've not seen realized to its fullest potential. But all of these inputs now are starting, or to a degree, as I mentioned, have been corroded and are really having all of incredible effects on how we see the world. Get stuck in your algorithms. We have two different perspectives: how we see the world, how we interact with each other, how we consider each other, who we select as our leaders, all of these things.
Before we get more into the discerning the corrosion, you talked about artificial intelligence, AI. What's your assessment of what the next horizon of artificial intelligence will do to the information we see, read, skim? So much of what's out there on any platform of social media, even traditional media, AI being used to manipulate text, visuals, video, photos. So that's distorting, changing reality. Talk about what the next horizon of AI will do to these images, text, data, information, to communication, and how to navigate that.
I mean, maybe we'll all be living in an alternate universe where there is no reality. I mean, it could get to that point. I mean, there is a reason why President Biden said in his final address to the nation that we're missing what's really going on right now, that we're falling short of addressing the real problem, the source of what's creating this divide in our nation. And that is mis and disinformation. AI is a mechanism by which you do these things, but it's the things that are really having the greatest effect on society. How we deal with them, we're not there because we can't agree that it's actually a problem. If you go to Capitol Hill, the conversation devolves into an issue of censorship, right, and First Amendment rights, and not an issue of whether or not we're feeding our people accurate information and the health of our minds. Also think about TikTok was a really great example of that, where our elected officials voted past a bill based on national security reasons to ban TikTok. And now TikTok is still functioning in the United States. So it's an issue of we can't address it because we can't agree that we have a problem. I don't know if you watched the January 6th hearings, but there was a judge, Judge Leggett, Republican judge. He was the one who told Pence that he had to certify the election. And he made an exceptional point, which was that in order, and I've been married and divorced, so I totally sign off on this statement. I can corroborate the statement. But his point was you have to have two healthy parties at the table that can agree that we've got a problem in order to move forward together as a strong nation. And right now, we don't have the two parties at the table that are agreeing that mis and disinformation, AI being a vehicle, a mechanism by which that's happening, that we need to regulate and we need to address. So it's just rampant. So I do believe that there will be a situation where, and I keep trying to make a matrix sort of analysis, you know what I mean? But I do believe there could be a situation where we're all just living in an alternate universe.
You talked about two parties. Let's get into this notion of two parties as it relates to the giver of the information and the receiver of the information.
Sure.
The receiver of the information. So this notion of listener beware, and you talked about this, you touched on this around this corrosion. Listener beware. As we receive communication, as we receive information from the highest offices in the land, whether it's the United States or other countries, how do we discern between what is data-driven versus perception-driven versus manipulation-driven information?
How do you discern? I mean, I think the way I don't think the rules on that change. I think you've got to have more than one source to corroborate the information. But I do believe if you ask me, how does my business work? I would say the answer is D, all the above are at play at all times. You got data. Some people rely on data. Some of it is real, some of it isn't. Numbers being thrown around, tossed around these days. It's hard to figure out what's real, what's not. By the time someone, in fact, CBS, you know, I'm a news contributor there, a political news contributor here. A reporter made the point that even now fact-checking has become politicized. That is a problem. Okay, so anyway, so you got data, then you've got perception, and you've got manipulation. And all of them are constantly at play. And actors in my profession, in any profession, in fact, I mean, this applies in business, are manipulating each one of those, leveraging each one of those to their own end and for their own benefit and gain. It's happening everywhere you go. Now, how do we determine what is real and what is not? I think it's multiple sources. I also think I'm encouraging people now, if we just narrow it down to the news, to go beyond U.S. media. Most people don't even go beyond U.S. media. Obviously, you've got trade media that's really, really fact-based, right? Financial Times, mostly the Wall Street Journal, right? Those are The Economist. Those are really fact-based kind of publications. I think you can always obviously trust those. But as it relates to whether or not you're being manipulated and how that influences your perception, I think we need to start going outside of U.S. media. I'll give you a good example. President gave his State of the Union address last night. Facts are facts. I would venture to say 98% of what he said was not true. But if you look at the U.S. media coverage of it, the coverage is not about what he said, corroborating it, fact-checking it, so that the media is decoding it for you, because that used to be the role of the media. They're no longer doing that anymore, because fact-checking, decoding it for you, is now politicized. I don't want a lawsuit from the president. Why am I in that business anymore? They're not in that business anymore. So most of the coverage that came out of last night's State of the Union address was on Democrats' protest and Al Green walking out, rather than the substance of what the president said last night. To get back to your earlier point about the authority figure, I should be able to take at his word, okay? So that's really the challenge, is you've got all of these, what used to be the purveyors of truth, and these vehicles and outlets to hold people accountable to the truth, are no longer in that business anymore. So you got a big hole in a big gulf. What is it flooded with? AI, disinformation, apathy, junk on social media, pick any platform. It's flooding the zone now. So now you don't know what's real, what isn't real. Am I being manipulated? Is my perception off? What's fact and what's data, what's not? Is it subjective? Is it objective? It's very hard to figure out. But anyway, but I think it gets back to the fundamentals, which have always been in existence, which is multiple sources. Sources you feel like you can trust, that have credibility in those spaces and places and on those particular issues.
But on that point, and let's get into the pivots, right?
Sure.
Because on that point, competition is pivoting. And whether I am a parent, a community leader, an educator, a business person, an elected official, whoever I am, whatever stakeholder I am in the country, I'm out here to compete. I'm out here to win. I'm out here to make the best decisions.
Sure.
Not only in terms of who I elect, but my people, process, my systems, the business decisions I make, the career decisions I make, right? So you just outlined it. So if the traditional legacy news platforms, whether it's CBS or Fox or whoever, or the niche platforms or social media or the influencers, and there's varying degrees of truth-telling versus story spin or story journalism, storytelling commentary.
Sure, and we haven't even gotten to the modern media landscape, right? Which is podcasting and, so all this. Yeah.
You're a communication expert.
Sure.
Help me be competitive. Help me protect myself. How do I compete to get the best information so I can make the best decisions for whatever problems I'm solving for?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is I'm not responsible for all of that. I can only be responsible for what I write and I say, and I leave with honesty. So, I mean, I think if you're a business, obviously you're going to mine for the best data, best research, right? I don't think that changes. I think if you're trying to base it on government data in this modern time, you might have a hard time figuring it out. But you know what? Let me talk about the real pivot. And the real pivot is understanding your stakeholders. Who are my key stakeholders? Developing an intimate relationship with those stakeholders. That way you sort of drown out all the noise. You're getting right to the source of where you need to, of what really matters to your bottom line, right? What you're appealing to. So that really has to be the pivot, I think, to be a little provocative in this current time where everything is confused. Up is down, down is up. What's real, what's not, I don't really know, but I just want to be entertained because I don't want to stress myself out with what might be or might not be reality. So I think getting to understanding your stakeholders. Now, the reason why that's important in business is you always get jammed up by your stakeholders. People aren't looking around the corner, watching their back, thinking about their stakeholders. That got people in a bind right after George Floyd died. It's getting people in a bind over DEI now, right? So, but the more intimate you are in understanding your stakeholders, I think that would lead to greater yield and success, if that makes any sense. So maybe that's the new pivot. We're still trying to figure it out.
And what's a significant communications pivot that you led, either voluntary or involuntary?
Oh man, so, I remember when I was, the title, The Queen of the War Room is apt, right? And so I love investigations. This is what I really do. My favorite game when I was growing up was Clue, like who did it with what instrument, what room. So I did all the major investigations in Congress. So Benghazi, the Russia investigation, Solyndra, Pickett, impeachment. I ran the first impeachment war room. Like that's where I really really perform best, if that makes any sense. I was going to say something that wasn't appropriate for a podcast, but nevertheless. And so I was running somewhat point on the Russia investigation during Trump's first term. Made a lot of great headway, revealed a lot of information. Investigation was going, a lot of successes. Then we came up against the Mueller report, failed, flopped. People didn't buy it, it didn't work out well. And I only came back, just to give you a little bit about my history, from the White House to work in Congress so that I could run the opposition to Donald Trump. And so I felt like, this is it. We didn't do it. We lost. It's over. This guy's Teflon. Nothing's sticking. I mean, now he's back, so, maybe it didn't stick. But nevertheless, I was at a loss then. And I remember being in Pelosi's office and she says to me, listen, you've got to know your power. I brought you back for a reason. What we're fighting for and defending is bigger than any one individual. You have a role in this. If you don't understand that, then I'm going to fire you. And of course I don't want to get fired. And you know what I mean? And here I am finding myself crying because it's like everything, I was conditioned to believe about this country was falling apart. The checks and balances, nowhere to be found, right? And people holding up the truth, nowhere to be found. So anyway, we were just at a complete loss. And then the incident happened with the president calling Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and asking for dirt on Joe Biden. And that was a pivot for us. It wasn't a big one because the message and the theme was always a threat to American democracy, not one individual. To your point, this is not about an individual. This is about a systematic undermining of the integrity of our nation and what we believed in. So anyway, that was the sort of one of the biggest pivots was, okay, now we're pivoting to running to a legitimate, substantive impeachment investigation of the president on national security issues, not on an affair, right? Not on anything frivolous, but on national security basis. Did he violate his oath? All these things. Anyway, so that was, I would say, was probably my biggest pivot in my career. And at the end of the day, it was a historic effort. 60% of the country believed our evidence, our messaging, our framework, believed the president did something wrong in that situation, violated his oath of office. And it laid the foundation for Joe Biden to win the White House. So that I would say would be my biggest pivot.
In what you described there are a lot of, or some nonlinear forces. So I want to get into the magic. How do you define serendipity? And where did serendipity play a critical role for communication outcomes at the White House?
I would say in this particular situation, you want to stick with it?
In any situation.
Yeah, since we've already gone down this path, I would say, you know, what I do respect and admire about Donald Trump is when he wants to be transparent, he will be very transparent. He doesn't hide the ball. And in that particular situation, what was serendipitous was we got the evidence that he placed the call, and he released the tape. He's like, you're absolutely right. I made the call and I asked for dirt on Joe Biden. I withheld javelins to a U.S. ally for my own political purposes. I did it. And here's the video. Here's the audio tape. In my mind, I'm like in Pelosi's office, if you can like picture it, like, poof, like, is he giving us the evidence? This is unheard of. What defendant gives you the evidence to convict them? But he understood something, which gets back to your previous point about data, questions around the truth, perception. It can't be. Why would I do such a thing? Why would I give you the tape and it's true? Something about that doesn't even add up in your mind, right? People and manipulation, all of those things were at play, if that makes sense. So anyway, that was serendipitous, like that he gave us the audio tape. But I think he understood the environment that we currently live in, where people are trying to decode all of that information. How do you reconcile in your mind a defendant giving the prosecutor the evidence to convict them? It doesn't happen that way. In fact, it's not even believable. I don't believe it. And that's kind of the world that we're living in, and that's kind of how it all happened. So now we're constantly in this uphill battle trying to persuade people about what is true and what's not true.
The irrationality in communication that we see, and by the way, serendipity can be both headwind and tailwind.
Sure, of course.
So your thoughts on the irrationality in the world around communication. The irrationality, I believe, will only continue. Mm-hmm. So we've not hit the rock bottom. Mm-hmm. Where is it going in your perspective? Where is it going, and what serendipitous forces, headwind or tailwind, will continue to impact the irrationality we see, especially in a nonlinear way?
reminds me of one of my favorite lines and I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite movies, but it's a line that stuck with me. And it's probably because it's so elementary, but still not accepted. It's in Austin Powers. I don't know which movie it is, but it's when Dr. Evil was frozen and they defrost him, if that's the term. I need to figure that out. And he comes back and he says to number 2, well, what have you been doing since I've been gone? And number 2 says, well, I bought up all the media. And Dr. Evil says, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. Like, why would you do that? And number 2 says, if you control the inputs, you control the outputs. And that's as simple as it is. I mean, to your point, I do it with my own daughter, right? Be a good person. You're a great person. You're smart. You're brilliant. Then she performs in a good, brilliant way, right? So that's where we are, where those inputs are not only corrupted, corroded, but people are intentionally corrupting and corroding them. And now, in my opinion, the die has been cast. I'm not sure how we go back, especially if we cannot agree to the source of the problem. We are arguing on the margins, right? Should Facebook be fact-checking? Should they not be fact-checking? Mark says, I'm not. Is me, calling you a disparaging name my First Amendment right? Is it not? All of those things now are, I think, continuing to take us down a path. Because I think that movie is probably at least, 20 years old? And that's not the first time we've ever heard that line before. So I just think the die is cast. I think all of these forces are exacerbating, expediting, speeding up the process. AI, more and more disinformation from nefarious actors, foreign and domestic, And so I don't know the answer to how we come back, especially if we don't agree that it's a problem. And try convincing a young person that's lived their entire life on a device of what's real and what's not real, who's getting their information off of TikTok from some social media influencer, that what they're receiving is a bad input. I mean, that's a hard thing to do in this environment. And then what's a good input anymore? I mean, if these flagship, Tiffany type outlets are no longer fact-checking, the headlines are about the show and not about the substance, what does this leave us? What does this leave us with?
Ashley, finally.
Yes.
Are
we going to be living in the Matrix? I don't know.
On that point, what's your advice on how to cultivate the CodeBreaker mindset?
My advice is to, I think having a sense of yourself, the world around you, where you fit, people's motivations and intentions. I think those are the keys to decoding just about any situation that you find yourself in. Intimate understanding of self, the world around you, and the people that move it. I think if you understand that, you can decode just about any situation. And I think the only way you get there is with an intimate engagement across all of those things. Now, what's stopping us are these devices, the stress of the world, the pace of the world. I think all of that is making it harder to decode because we're no longer connecting, right? It goes back to, if you're sort of a political scientist, like Bowling for Columbine, right? Like Bowling Alone, or, those books that are written about how we're, as a society, becoming less connected. And I think for that reason, we don't know each other. We're suspicious of each other. We don't know what to believe, who to believe, all of those things. So that's what I would say, I think, is the formula to almost decoding just about any situation.
Ashley,
Yes.
thank you so much
Thanks
for joining
having
us.
me.
Thank you for supporting the CodeBreaker Mindset. For more episodes, go to www.chitranawbatt.com to like and subscribe. Connect with me on social media at Chitra Nawbatt.